All right, as co-chair of the Water Resources Advisory Board, I would like to call the April 17th, 2023 meeting to order. Our first agenda item is approval of the March meeting minutes. Were there any comments from the board members?
Do we accept those as there?
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes? It's unanimous.
Mr. Chair, would it be okay if I read the Zoom guidance when you all are ready?
Yes, please do. Joanna.
Wonderful. Okay. Don't mean to interrupt the flow. Let me just interject here real quickly by saying that my name is Joanna Bloom and I'm serving as the technical host for this meeting. We'll start by sharing a few slides of the virtual meeting rules that we follow. These rules are in place to find a balance between transparency with community members and security that minimizes disruptions. We need a full name associated with each person's participation in open and public comment, and we cannot unmute you without it. If your full name is not currently displayed, please change it or send me a text and I'm happy to change it for you. There is no chat feature for this meeting. The Q&A function is enabled and can be used to address Zoom connectivity questions only. If you have difficulty with the Q&A function, you can text me at 303-817-1742. Members of the public may be unable to control the audio and video features. Video is limited to city officials, employees, and invited speakers only. I will unmute you when you're recognized to speak. If you're on the phone, you may need to press *6 to unmute yourself. You can indicate your desire to participate in open or public comment by using the raise hand function. You'll find this feature in the participant box at either the top or bottom of your screen. If you've joined us by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand. I will call your name when it's your turn to speak and announce the name of the next speaker on deck. After I have unmuted you, please say your first and last name, and a 3-minute timer will be displayed and will start as soon as you begin your comments. Thank you for your participation. And that's it.
Thank you, Joanna. Our next agenda item is swearing in the new board member and election of the board officers. Our new board member is not present at this time. So
I think is virtual public comment
Yes.
supposed to come before?
Just ahead of our.
excuse me.
Yeah.
Agenda item 3, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yes, our third agenda item is virtual public comment. Is there any public comment from the members at large in the audience?
I am taking a look now. If you choose to make public comment, please go ahead and virtually raise your hand and I'll call on you. I do have one hand raised. Karen, if you want to get the clock going, then I will allow Lynn. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Yeah.
And we can hear you.
I didn't know if I was going to get on this meeting because I didn't get on until 6:04 and it was in the middle and it's kind of confusing here. Just got my water bill today after went to the World Affairs discussion, World Affairs conference on World Affairs, and Becky Mitchell was really good. You should watch what she said. There was Colorado River, 2 parts. First, what are the issues? And second, what you can do for action. Afterwards, I went up and I said, no, one thing I'm upset about is 90% of the water coming out of my tap is going down the drain waiting for warm. And she said, well, actually, that isn't so bad because all that water comes back. And no one's ever told me this. You know, I'm sorry, I'm not, a water expert. I'm an ultrasound technologist, but I kind of figured this. My brother's water treatment guy, water chemist for the city. But what Becky said was your water gets used 11 times, so it'll be reused 11 different times. But before I could kind of grok that, I realized, well, that's a problem because that's expensive. And then I said, and my water bill's expensive. And then ironically, today I get a bill because I've been waiting, I'm low income and I can get some funding for my water bill. And they say you have to wait until you get the bill. You can't pay it or they can't, you know, these providers of the funds, ARA funds or whatever, can't pay it unless you have a big bill. So I asked Joanna, then what do I do? And she said, just wait. And now I get a bill. I get no notice, no, you know, no warning until they've already charged me 27 bucks. So to my understanding, from maybe it's my bad, I don't know. But from what I understood from Joanna, you get a good warning before this happens. But instead, they just stuck me with 27 more bucks and now it's 400 bucks. So, and this was the cheapest water bill I've had in a long time because I try not to use any water. I don't even irrigate my yard. I don't irrigate, you know, and 90% of the water I'm losing. It just seems like a kind of futile situation to be paying $80 a month. And when we've got these critical water situations going on with the upper basin and the lower basin and what have you. And then we're putting on CU South so we can have more water demands. And then we've got, you know, the missing middle being accommodated for with reduced parking spaces when neighbors have spoken up and said the utilities are not working. The sewer lines don't work in that area. Our area got flooded at 2206 Pearl. So it seems like you've got some problems to deal with. Done, I guess. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn. Is there any more public comment?
I do not see anyone else with their hand raised, so that is it for public comment this evening. Oh, we have one last hand raised, just under the wire, if that works for the board. All right, fantastic. I will go ahead and unmute Tim Holbrook.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry I missed the first minute or two here. If this has been covered, please just tell me. I'm sorry. Appreciate the opportunity to bring up an issue I brought up last time, which was communication with property owners that have creek frontage and their responsibility to keep the flow channel and flow capacity clear, not just debris. I noticed today I got a handy little reminder about flood awareness. Great, good work, utility department. And now it does say that it is the responsibility, if you have a creek on your property, it's your responsibility to maintain the channel and keep it clear of debris and ensure you're not impacting surrounding properties. Well, hey, that's better than nothing, but you're on the way. I know it takes quite a while to do things, but how about, and maybe it's coming up later, like I said, if it is, fine. I got a nice email from Joe that you did receive my email, and I assume the board has seen it as well. There are other very specific interim flood control measures that I think bear some attention of the board and the utilities to see if some of them can be done without even changing budgets. It's more about reprioritizing resources. So I'd appreciate it if that would be addressed, if not in this meeting, maybe another one. I know these things take time. Thanks very much. That's all.
Thank you, Tim. In this case, Joe, do you want to respond?
If you would like us to, sure. I know Joanna has been in contact with the first speaker about the ARPA, and she may have some information in case members of the public who didn't speak tonight have similar questions. So Joanna, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that first one.
Sure, yeah. So in addition to Zoom hosting, I also manage utility billing and utilities maintenance, and we do have a maintenance item scheduled under matters later this evening, so I can speak to that then. In terms of the utility billing assistance, we do have American Rescue Plan Act funds available, ARPA funding, is the acronym for it. And yes, unfortunately, we can't credit the ARPA money until you do have an overdue bill. There has to be an outstanding balance on the bill, but as soon as you apply, we will take care of that for you. There is an online form that I'd be happy to share the link to. And then, if you, I think, I'm not exactly sure what the late fees are. So Lynn, I'm happy to reach out to you. But that's part of the process, and are absolutely have ARPA funds available for folks that need them. So, and I do believe we're headed into a second round of making ARPA funds available. So for sure, if you know of folks in need, please put them in touch with the utility billing office and we'll help you out.
Thank you, Joanna.
Welcome.
And Joe, if I'm not mistaken, we'll be talking about the matters that Tim Holbrook brought up
Yeah.
later.
Yeah,
Okay.
we have several things under matters tonight. In fact, we only have one agenda item, but we have a little bit more than usual under matters, and that will be one of them, to talk about communication that the speaker requested for the public, as well as just our general plans for maintenance, since that was one of the themes of the flood master plan that was approved last year by city council. So I don't expect this will be a super lengthy meeting, so it won't be too long before we're.
Thank you very much on that. Well, now we're ready to head to agenda item 4. I apologize for my slip up earlier, and that is swearing in of new board members and election of board officers.
Our new board member isn't here, so we'll see if she attends at some point during the meeting, but we can probably proceed with the discussion of officers if you'd like.
Sure, let's do that. And so we need to elect a new chair, new vice chair, and a secretary. And so if I could, if there are any nominations, let's start, I guess, with chair.
Nominate Gordon for chair.
Second that. All in favor? Thank you.
This will be a recurring theme.
Let's talk about vice chair then. Any nominations for vice chair?
Nominate John.
I second. All in favor?
Right.
And then I would like to see if there are any nominations for secretary.
To nominate Steve for secretary.
I second. All in favor? So let the record show that Gordon McCurry will be chair of Bradford this year. John will be vice chair and Steve will be secretary. Let us move on then to agenda item 5, which is the water supply update.
We can do that, and that might be a world record for the speed and election of RAB officers. So nice, well done under the circumstances. So as I mentioned a minute ago, the water supply update is our only agenda item that we had a memo for this evening. And as the three of you know, this is something that we do in April every year. And April-May timeframe is when we know the most about our water supply year and how it's shaping up based on reservoir storage and where it's sitting and snowpack that's developed in the mountains, as well as our northern water supplies. So fortunately for our department, there's always a lot going on, and at least not immediately managing a drought doesn't have to be on that list, or water restrictions, but so the item tonight will be led by Layla Parker. She's a senior water resources manager in our water resources group, and I will turn it over to Layla.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. I'm Layla Parker with Water Resources, and glad to be here in person with you all. This time of year, as Joe said, we traditionally provide an update to RAB on our water supply. We know more about our snowpack, We're looking at our reservoir levels after relying primarily on reservoir storage to meet municipal demand all winter, and we're thinking about expectations for demand for the year. And we make an annual assessment at this time of whether a drought declaration and associated water use restrictions are necessary. So I'm going to talk through all that today. This photo is of Silver Lake Reservoir up in our watershed in March last month. It's been very snowy and cold up there. So before we get into how the water supply is looking, I'd like to remind you of the geography of our source water system. So on the map, you see in blue, the Middle Boulder Creek and North Boulder Creek watersheds, and we manage these and use them to meet the bulk of our municipal demand. We treat that water at the Patassa Water Treatment Plant before delivering it to Boulder's service area, which is shown in the red hatch. And we also treat water at the northeast corner of town, at the Boulder Reservoir Water Treatment Plant, and that water originates on the western slope in the Colorado River headwaters. So very high level overview. And we develop and plan our water supply system according to our 1989 reliability criteria, which are our level of service goals. So those reliability criteria define the acceptable frequency of water use restrictions for droughts of varying severity. And we model and plan the system with the goal of having no more than 5 years with water use restrictions over the course of 100 years. And the intensity of those restrictions in those years can vary from reduced outdoor watering restrictions to meeting essential uses only. So just allowing indoor and emergency uses. And in those cases, we may lose landscaping. So since establishing that framework in 1989, 2002 is the only time that we have declared a drought. And we've established and updated our drought plan since that time. Under our current classification, the 2002 drought would have resulted in fairly severe limitations on outdoor water use. So the determination of whether to declare a drought is informed by the city's drought plan. I have spoken to you all many times in the last few years about that drought plan. And the PSI. So the projected storage index, or the PSI, is basically a ratio of water supply available to Boulder and demand. And we evaluate on May 1st of each year when our water supply indicators such as snowpack are most reliable. As you know, we finalized an update to that plan last year, and we refined our methodology for this PSI determination. We improved our projection of reservoir storage based on sort of newer data and an improved regression equation. And then we improved the way we changed the way we calculate unrestricted demand. So we now do a 90th percentile of the last 10 years in order to reflect high demand within current water use trends. So the factors influencing water supply, while the PSI provides a consistent data-driven approach to drought determinations, we do support it with other data and observations that provide context. And we're continually monitoring a number of factors that affect our water supply that play into the PSI and into how we interpret it. And those include snowpack, stream flow, regional drought conditions, and I'll run through current data for each of those indicators next. Photo on the left is our staff monitoring SWE, or snow water equivalent, at a snow course in the Silver Lake watershed. And we, that is part of a network of SNOTEL and snow course stations that the Natural Resource Conservation Service maintains around the West. So looking at those stations within Colorado, we see overall statewide snowpack is 136% of median, which is great. Snowpack is a lot higher to the western portion of the state. In the South Platte Basin where we are, it's just at 100% of median as of yesterday. This figure shows the Colorado River Basin. I'm going to do more Colorado River Basin slides than we normally would. Because of the situation on the Colorado. So this slide was something that we got from a Northern Water presentation last week. And basically what you see here, I'm sure you can't really read the numbers, but this is a ranking of the SWE at the SNOTEL station over its period of record at that day, on that day. So essentially, a 1 indicates that that's the highest level of SWE recorded on that date. So you can see a lot of 1s and 2s and 3s in this figure, which is fantastic. Coming back down to our watershed, this is the Snowtell site at University Camp in the North Boulder Creek watershed. The black line shows the 2023 snowpack. Green shows the 30-year median. The little green asterisk is the median peak SWE. So you can see we're still a couple weeks away from when we typically reach peak SWE. But we've been at or above median for most of the year up in North Boulder Creek. We're at 98% of median right now. The photo on the right is Eric Johnson, our source water facilities manager, inputting data at the Snowtell station a couple winters ago. Moving over to Middle Boulder Creek, the Lake Eldora Snowtell site is the one that we look at. That's above Barker Reservoir. This station's been a little bit below median the last couple of weeks, at 94% of median today. We've had some early runoff and a little bit of a jump up in SWE from last week's snowstorm. So a little bit lower than median, but still relatively comfortable. So in addition to snowpack, we're also tracking stream flow forecasts. As you know, all of Boulder's water supply comes from diverting water from creeks, either on direct flow rights or into storage. And so in the summer, we're really relying on those direct diversions from stream flow, and we want to preserve our water in storage. In addition, we're looking at downstream users in the Boulder Creek Basin who are diverting directly from the creek and may more readily call for water if stream flow is limited. So we're looking at getting a sense of what those flows will be like this year. And we use a couple different products. The one on the left is from Northern Water, and they are forecasting well above average for a lot of the creeks north of us, but 102% of average for Boulder Creek. One on the right is from the NRCS, a little bit below the median for that same April to July period. But generally the forecast for Boulder Creek and the Southwest Basin is near average. And then again, looking at the Colorado River Basin, forecasters are projecting much higher than average inflows. As you can see in the blue is above 130, I believe that's percent of average. So those higher inflows to Lake Powell and Lake Mead will certainly help, but not solve the current issues on the Colorado. We also look at regional drought indicators for context. This is the US Drought Monitor weekly map from last Thursday, the 13th, and you can compare it to that date at this time last year. So certainly market improvement on the western slope, about the same in the South Platte Basin year to year. And looking at the Colorado, just, huge improvement over generally the entire Western US over the last year, with this week being on the left and last year on the right. Good stuff. Thank you, Snowpack. So all of this ties into our reservoir storage levels, and that reservoir storage is really key to operating our system through dry periods, whether in a year or between years. So this graph shows in orange our current water year storage levels. The gray dash is the 10-year average, and the gray band is the historic storage range of reservoir levels. As I think you all know, we are in the middle of a multi-year dam maintenance project on Albion Reservoir, which means that about 5% of our reservoir storage capacity is unavailable to us to fill. And so as of April 1, we're at a total storage. We are at 59% of total capacity compared to a historical average of 65%, but still well above that minimum band in the gray shading. And given the stream flow and the snowpack data I discussed before, we're fairly optimistic that the reservoirs will fill. So summarizing where we're at with the snapshot of Silver Lake from last week, it's still cold and snowy. We've had a strong snowpack, the stream flow forecasts are around average. We expect our reservoirs to fill. And Northern is setting a 70% quota for CBT water, which is the long-term average. So our preliminary calculation of the PSI puts us well above that first drought alert stage. We will officially run the PSI calculation at the end of the month, but we don't expect any significant change that would bring us down into a drought determination. Obviously, we will still be encouraging wise water use. We're updating our water efficiency plan, as you all know, which may impact our water conservation program. And we do have a survey out right now for input on matters related to the water efficiency plan, and that survey closes next week. So I think we've gotten 500 responses as of today, which is really fantastic. So that's what I have, and welcome to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the board?
Such a positive water supply outlook. Nice.
It is.
I guess, I think we've talked about it before. Are there any plans to ever use additional data collection sources like ASO? I can't remember if that's something that you're interested in or we not need it, or is it?
We are participating in a regional ASO group that's doing flights over the Front Range. And so far, I think we're planning to do a flight like last week or this week and couldn't because of weather. They haven't flown yet. They're just looking for a weather window.
Okay.
But yeah, we are they're doing sort of a large swath of the Front Range. And so we're really looking forward to getting that data and, looking at collaboration with the Mountain Research Station on all the data that they collect and how we can kind of integrate that into our planning.
And what is ASO?
Airborne Snow Observatory. So it's collecting snowpack data from planes over, a wide swath of land. So like an entire watershed versus just like one SNOTEL site that has one snow pillow and like one snow course. Great potential.
Steve, any questions? I have just one. Leila, you mentioned that Northern Water, the quota they've established this year is 70% of average. How does that compare to other years?
It is 70%. So the quota is like the percentage of your shares that you get. So we get 70% of our CBT shares.
Our allocation.
Of our allocation, thank you. But that 70% quota is average.
That's their typical allocation. And they look at it's a supplemental supply. So they look at what are they projecting yields of the east slope water supplies for all their members. They also though take a look at projections for filling their reservoir system from the west slope water. So it is a bit of a combination of supply and demand on the east slope and supply on the west slope in terms of what they can fill. But they have said that they're they do some modeling and projections of their own system around this time of year, and they're maybe 50%, their projection for filling and spilling Granby, Grand Lake, Shadow Mountain, about 50% confidence that they will fill and spill this year. So they're anticipating a very good runoff into their system this year, which gives them, a bit of a buffer in terms of allocating water for users.
Well, the calculation that they do on what percentage of our allocation we actually receive is not just based on the availability in their system, it's partly based upon what they judge our alternative sources to be.
It's intended to be a supplemental supply, and it's a little bit counterintuitive at a glance, but when you really think about it, it makes sense. In a dry year, they might give a 80, 90, or 100% quota so that users get to use all of their water. And in a wet year, they could potentially do less.
And so
In a dry year, people may not have as much of their own other sources.
you guys provide them with a bunch of information about what we think our own sources are to enable them to make that calculation?
Yeah, we do provide them, we give them monthly reservoir levels, for example. So,
And they have a team of engineers and hydrologists that also look at all the same type of information that Layla was presenting, as well as their own system info.
We typically have this update about this time of year. Does staff reassess the water supply situation later in the year, particularly towards the end of the summer?
not in a formal manner. The PSI is really based, like the calculation incorporates this assumption around reservoir fill. And so the value that it brings, the meaning that it has, sort of goes away when the reservoirs have already filled. So we're not using that determination at other junctures in the year.
In terms of operations, though, our water resources staff and our water treatment staff, as well as the state water commissioner, are in communication daily. And we're looking at if it's a really dry summer, we may switch sources for various reasons. If things are pretty normal and we've got choices, there may be water quality factors that impact our source selection. So we don't do a big formal community report out like this, other than this time of year. I think we would if we found ourselves concerned that we might need to do restrictions, but otherwise it is monitored continuously internally.
And we did set in the drought plan, we set this drought watch stage that we could go into at any point during the year. So we found ourselves feeling that we needed to do broader communication about water use in August. We could go into that condition and use that as a tool.
If we had a dry year or one that you were concerned where we might approach some of these drought metrics. Outside of the operational issues with the two plants or blending considerations or whatever on hydro revenue and so forth, would our tendency be to try to use as much of the northern water as we could to preserve our own source waters, or what's the incentive when things start to get a little bit tighter in terms of supply?
I can speak to that, and also for the record, Kim Hutton, Water Resources Manager. Sorry. Yeah, so overall, I think we're looking at generally trying to preserve water in storage. That is our drought reserve, and we get an annual allocation of water from Northern every year. So later on in the summer, if all of our systems are up and running, and we've got our choice of supplies, we may look to use a little bit more water, CBT water that's treated at the 63rd Street water treatment plant.
Just to preserve our own reservoirs.
Yeah, I mean, our priority wise, we will use what direct flow rights we have available first, so maximize that use. And that, of course, is coming directly from the streams, not from storage. We're also looking at strategies for trying to get more water into storage, which we can do through exchanging water, CBT water out of Boulder Reservoir and up to our mountain storage. So we've got a few strategies, and we're trying to look forward, anticipating what the year will be and what our demands will be.
I would add to what Kim mentioned, that during the runoff season, we preferentially will use our Boulder Creek sources, and I think most of the board members know we have 8 hydroelectric plants integrated into our system, so there's a revenue benefit And the reservoirs can't be more full than full, so we'll while they're filling and spilling, we'll try to take as much as we can through our hydro. And 2 years ago, when we had the Marshall Fire at the very end of the year, I think we went from August all the way through December 31st without any measurable precipitation in Boulder. And in a year like that, we'll definitely switch to the northern supplies. The team will recognize that that's happening and make that switch to preserve our storage.
Yes, this has indeed been a cold and snowy winter. I have a good view of Bear Peak, which we can see nicely from here also. And I noted that there's been snow on Bear Peak since before Thanksgiving. So we're just shy of 5 months continuous snow up there. And I've lived in Boulder for a lot of years. So I've never seen it that continuous.
Yeah, it's been cold. It hasn't melted out.
Yeah.
Through the drier.
Any other questions from the board on this? Well, Leila and Kim, thank you for the presentation and the discussion. Our next agenda item is matters from the board. Any matters from the board to raise? Okay, I have just one, which is I brought in just one of the handouts as a reminder to me to bring it up that in the latest water bill, there have been several of these. This is on the water efficiency plan update, but there were two others. I don't recall exactly what they are right now. I just want to say what an effective communication tool this is, and would encourage continued inserts like this into the water bills. I think very helpful as a reminder. Because it's one thing to tell people, oh, it's on the website, go to the webpage, but that's quite another thing to open up the envelope and to see it, because it's a much more active participation effort to even to just recycle it, but certainly to look at it. And so I think those are a very good tool.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback and hearing Leila's report on the number of survey responses. Knowing the population of Boulder, that may not seem like a large number, but it can be hard to get people interested in utilities matters, and they can be in the tens and 20s sometimes. So that's actually doing pretty well. And I think our society is changing in the way we communicate, and we work closely with our communications department. Mailers and letters, one form of doing it. I think Joanna may speak to this in the flood maintenance update, but using more progressive ways to try and connect with people too, and all the tools come.
I'll just add, just for members of the public, the survey that Leila mentioned has a specific question about how you want to receive information, and mailers like this is one of the options. So if other folks agree with Gordon that this is an effective tool, I think strongly encourage you to fill out that survey and voice your opinion on how you like to hear it. And there should be utilities, TikTok videos. I think Jim was alluding to there.
Yeah. TikTok for sure. Well, policy wise, I'm not sure we can have that on city. Right.
Any other matters from the board? Okay, at this time, I'd like to move to agenda item 7, matters from staff.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a few more than we normally would, and a few with slides. So just to let you know what's coming, got a wastewater COVID update from our water quality team. Joanna will speak to flood maintenance as we discussed earlier. There was an email that came to the board chair and vice chairs previously about a pilot for a multi-board working group, so I'll mention that. And then I had forwarded to the board the memo that we did last week for city council for the encampment cleanup work, and I'll just have a brief update on that. But even though there's a bit there, I don't think it'll be super lengthy. So on the first one, the wastewater COVID update, since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we have been monitoring our wastewater for the presence of the COVID-19 virus. And there's a lot to that. I said it in a very simplistic way, but and then as the public attention to it has started to wind down and people have been doing less regular self-testing and doing that less frequently, wastewater has become relied upon more heavily for the public health officials to see what the trends are. So Melissa Mimna is our laboratory program supervisor, and she has 2 slides with a brief update on the program and trends. And I get these every Monday. I get an email from Melissa every Monday, as does the city manager. So I see the trends, and I thought there was some good news there and worth sharing with the board. So if Melissa is ready. take it
Thanks,
away.
Joe. And thank you for the opportunity to give this update. Karen, it looks like it says host disabled screen sharing.
Let me see, Melissa, if I can just help you out real quick.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I can share it if that would help as well.
Try it now. You should have co-host status, and that should allow for your sharing.
Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yeah, thanks.
Great. So thank you for the help there. As Joe mentioned, we began monitoring for SARS-CoV-2 in our wastewater in March of 2020. Our collaborative with the state began in August of that year. Despite being a new science, wastewater data quickly showed promise as a leading indicator of COVID case data. This graph shows City of Boulder reported clinical case data in blue and wastewater data in brown. As you can see, wastewater data correlated fairly well to case data up until around April 2022, when COVID testing and reporting began to decline significantly. At that point, public health saw an increased value in wastewater data since case data relies upon testing and reporting. So our current MOU with the state and CSU runs through July of this year. However, federal funding has been secured through 2025 with discussion of finding more permanent funding sources. In September of 2020, the CDC established the National Wastewater Surveillance System to coordinate and build the nation's capacity to track COVID-19 and wastewater. NWSS has named 2 centers of excellence, one in Houston and the other one here in Colorado, including Denver University and the CDPHE. The mission of our Denver Center of Excellence is to support and work to expand the wastewater surveillance system throughout the Mountain and Pacific regions by providing training and education. We're also looking globally to learn from each other and find ways to consider and improve the distribution and equity of monitoring. Improving public dashboards is another current focus. And probably most exciting, the news plans to expand our pathogen list in August of this year to include things like influenza, RSV, norovirus, Mpox, antibiotic-resistant genes, fungal infections, and other possible emerging pathogens. When COVID struck, the science and data were very new, and we weren't entirely prepared, but we've come a very long way in 3 years and learned a great deal. State and university labs are currently developing and testing new methods so that we can begin baseline monitoring of other pathogens in our wastewater. And continued funding for these programs and research will allow us to be more prepared for the next big event. And that's my update.
Thank you for that, Melissa. And if you noticed when she showed the graph on the first slide, there were 2 major spikes in the pandemic where cases were sky high, and it's fortunately been trending down for an extended period, which is for me is welcome information to see.
Is this kind of testing being done pretty widely across utilities in the country? I mean, or is it any kind of requirement that you do this, or how is it coordinated nationally?
I can give a quick response, and Chris or Melissa can add to it, but I know there are a number of municipalities across the state of Colorado that are participating in it. I'm not aware of it being mandatory, but like in our case, the public health officials and the city manager came to us and asked, would we be willing to try this? And I think we were noticing the trend on our own. So of course, we were willing to do that for public health benefits. Chris, Melissa, any?
Yeah, I was certainly following the trends initially, but Melissa, please give an update on how broad and wide these kind of programs have been implemented.
So right now, I think we are monitoring about 70% of Colorado's population, the wastewater of about 70% of Colorado. It's pretty extensive in the country. I don't know nationally what the percentage is, but I would see this becoming something that is monitoring required in the future. So we're definitely looking at ways to continue this. I think the funding is providing funding for it allows it to be a lot easier.
Was it a significant incremental cost or is this pretty minor additional analysis?
Well, initially, I recall our commercial lab option that was out there. They kind of subsidized it initially, and then it quickly jumped to like $300 per sample, which is quite pricey for any kind of analysis we do. So because of the program that Melissa shared, that was CDPHE and then ultimately federally funded, we've been able to stay involved as long as we have. So the city did put our own money out there initially, and then it got supported by this broader program.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa.
So the next one I mentioned is flood maintenance, and last month there was a request from a speaker reiterated tonight last month it was during the public hearing, tonight during open comment related to flood maintenance and whether we could send an informational letter and forms of communication to residents about community member responsibilities. In the 16 drainage ways in the city, we don't have easements and access to every part of each drainage. And so there are places where it's important for the community members to maintain the channel. So in 2022, Joanna Bloom, who's our deputy director in utilities, was also our project manager and led our flood master plan that the board weighed in on and council ultimately approved. And so she has a summary of our immediate maintenance plans, including planned outreach to speak to the request. And we committed last month to providing this update to the board tonight. So Joanna, if you want to take it away.
Will do. I'm assuming I'm sharing the right slide.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Looks like what we talked about.
That's good. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to provide a response. I did want to just start with the CFS that you all have heard a fair amount about. There were two recommendations in the CFS, however, that directly related to maintenance relevant to this conversation. One is that we increase the levels of staffing and that we also do a better job defining the roles and responsibilities for each public and private. And that really kind of set the policy direction. So since that time, in 2023, in this blue column, it speaks to that first recommendation about increasing staffing. So we are going through the current budget process and we are requesting an additional 5 full-time employee positions and the related equipment to be able to enhance our maintenance activities. That really, as mentioned in the CFS, will allow us to go from focusing on current hotspots and contractual obligations to including a more routine maintenance on a predictable cycle. So that's moving ahead. And then also in the vein of defining roles and responsibilities, which I think was the spirit of the request, we are making headway on that as well. And, you know, Joe touched on this a little bit. I'm glad to hear, I always love hearing feedback about how messages make it to people. We do have people that really like paper. We are noticing through a couple of our efforts that letters are kind of waning in their effectiveness in some populations. And so we're looking at other things like doing door hangers and using social media and other approaches as well to get the message out. So once we really hone in on that message, we'll disseminate through several different avenues. And it's really just to provide that clarity about the roles and responsibilities for each. And I'll say in the past, I think we've done a pretty decent job letting folks know that there is a private property component to it. We just haven't really given people that how-to guide, which I think is the next step, and the CFS confirmed that. So we're making headway there as well. We do have ongoing maintenance happening while we're doing all of these other efforts as well. This year we'll really focus on sediment removal, outfalls, and some vegetation removal. So that's what the maintenance will look like. There's also a parallel effort where we've partnered with the Mile High Flood District, and we're doing a stream assessment, which really conducts a need assessment. And that doesn't describe in detail how dynamic this project is. It has Google Earth videos of different drainage ways, and really does a nice job with mapping out the condition of streams so that we can really focus in on those streams that need the highest maintenance needs first, or we're prioritizing the maintenance now. So when that's ready, probably at the end of the year, that'll really inform some of this, which projects get done first. And we can provide more information about that as needed. And then lastly, we do have ongoing volunteer opportunities through our Count Me In Boulder Volunteer Cooperative. There's about 12 activities scheduled by residents throughout the city in April alone. You can always sign up to host a stream cleanup, and we'll provide gloves and bags and trash pickup and that kind of thing. If there's enough support, we can do little hand tools and that type of thing to have volunteer efforts as well, which is something that, folks can kind of immediately take on. So stay tuned. We can provide updates on all of this, but that's kind of where we are with a snapshot for maintenance. I did just want to speak quickly too. I think in an email to the board, there were two other points, one about cameras and the other one about maximizing ancillary channels to flood drainage ways. And I can provide a longer response as needed, but the short answer is that in terms of cameras, we really focus on the Alert 5 network, which is also hosted by the Mile High Flood District. And that combines both visual camera footage as well as predictive weather information to really give us that proactive reaction to potential flooding events. So we really focus on that Alert 5 network. And then in terms of the good news on the second one about looking at all the side channels that may contribute to flooding, that is part of our regular process, and that is well baked into kind of our mitigation planning. So that is occurring, and I'm sure someone from our flood group would be happy to give more information as needed. That's my update, unless there's questions.
What's the, sorry if I missed this earlier somewhere, Joanna, but what's the authority and sort of the geography of the Mile High Flood District, or how does it operate?
Yeah, so they're a regional, they used to be the Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, and they started in the 1970s to kind of coordinate flood activities for this region. And I could get you the details about who's involved, but they're really just kind of a regional partner that supports a lot of the Front Range communities and doing Front Range planning. And they also are a source of funding for us, both in terms of maintenance and some of our flood mitigation projects. I don't know, Joe or others, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, there's a tax mill levy that Boulder community members pay in other jurisdictions around the metro area, and the flood district receives that and provides funding for flood projects around the area. And I know Brandon Coleman and a number of people from our flood and stormwater engineering group attended a Mile High symposium last week. And I was supposed to attend, something came up and wasn't able to, but they mentioned how one of the staff presenters talked about Boulder and flood risk in the 2013 flood and some of our upcoming projects. And it's a priority for the district. So thank you for that, Joanna. And I've got one more update before the public spaces one, which that one I do have a few slides for. So we'll need to make Chris DeVille a co-host, because I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. So
He
Chris
is
will
good.
do the
He's a
slides
co-host,
for
so he should be good to go, but raise your hand if you have any trouble.
And just on that maintenance item, as you recall, there were 6 main themes of the flood master plan, and maintenance was one of them. And we heard loud and clear from the community concerns about maintenance. And so in our utilities maintenance team that covers water and wastewater and storm and flood, we really do in the water system and in the wastewater have a kind of a recurring cycle where we go through the whole system and inspect and clean it on a certain recurring frequency. And to date, the flood utility is not as mature as those others, and the resourcing hasn't caught up. And it's been more, as Joanna said, just kind of hitting the hot spots. And so have been working with our team and budget and evaluating the resources we have to do that work. And the proposal we'll bring forward this year will allow us to go through and do the system on a regular frequency, which is where we want to be. So the next one, I did send an email rather late, and apologies for that. I rarely communicate with the board by email, but I caught up and blasted a whole bunch to you with information for this meeting. There was a request from the city manager, and a number of boards were invited to consider nominating a designee for a multi-board working group for the Boulder Junction Phase 2. And so I think I sent the email around 4. So if you haven't seen it, you can catch up, but I'll try to hit the high points now. And Boulder Junction Phase 2 involves an area between Pearl Parkway on the south and Valmont on the north, 30th on the west, and Foothills Parkway on the east. If you're familiar with the Depot restaurant, it's that whole area. There used to be some car dealerships there. There has been quite a bit of city development and housing initiatives in that area. And as in terms of utilities, interests, and considerations, we have the Goose Creek drainage, which is one of the 16 major drainage ways that comes right through the middle of it. And there's a multi-use path. So there will be some recurring meetings, and I think this is intended to be a pilot to try something different than our traditional processes. And rather than a project team like the flood master plan team going around independently to different boards, the thought here is, well, what if for a project like this, we designated a nominee from each of the interested boards and had a process for them to work together to try and avoid conflicting and just different feedback throughout the process that then we have to navigate our way through. So that's the concept. And again, I sent some information on it. I think they are looking for a RAB designee. We may not be with RAB the most prominent board to weigh in on that, but there certainly would still be some interest around development and utilities management. I did ask for clarification from our planning director, the duration of the assignment. And it sounds like there's a desire to go to council this fall, but the assignment could go on 9 to 12 months beyond that. I don't know the frequency or duration of the meetings, but I do know our communications staff and city staff are mindful about volunteer time. And I would be really surprised if it was more than once a month kind of thing for an hour or so, which would be normal. So with kind of a short-handed board here tonight.
Joe, one thing that comes to mind is a question is, do you have a sense on when the city manager would like to have a response back by?
I think by the end of April here, but given that we had a shorthanded April board meeting and this was really our first opportunity to discuss it, sometimes there can be consideration for if you'd rather table it to the May meeting, which will be really complicated, which you're about to find up on, under upcoming matters. We could ask for more time or potentially coordinate offline, but I think the desire is by the end of April.
I ask because I'd like to give the two members who aren't present tonight the opportunity to weigh in if they're interested.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you wanted to have a preliminary discussion and here, and if one of the three of you are interested, you would do that as well, or you could just table it all.
Any interest?
Hey, can you, I'm a little confused, how, like you said, Brad would be a kind of a lower priority perspective, I guess. I don't know what the phrase you use, but is it, because I know
Say
that.
it very well.
I didn't say, I apologize for paraphrasing poorly, but because I know the Goose Creek through there is already, the mitigation work's been done, so it's not like there's a
Yeah.
discussion of development versus mitigation. So what would be the RAB perspective on that, do you envision?
I think the department and board with the primary interest in it would be our planning department, planning and development services department, and the planning board for items like that. Anytime there is development in the city, there can be infrastructure considerations if there's plans to build more housing or more buildings. Is the infrastructure there to support it? I'm pretty sure the infrastructure in this area is fairly mature and can likely support what is planned. And then things like water supply in general for the planning of the city and the population and what type of growth might be happening, whether it's infill or more single family development, can be there as well. So I think that would be the thing for RAB, and I could imagine a board member could be designated and go to the initial meeting, and you could probably size up whether it's full-time participation or certain meetings. Sometimes assignments are like that. I don't have those details right now. That's what I know, and that's what I can share tonight.
You know if there's a scheduled date for the first meeting?
I was looking over the material today and I didn't see that information. I believe there's actually a public meeting tonight on it. I got a response from the planning director and he was at the meeting. But I would imagine I would guess that the board's tenure would likely start in sometime in second half of May or June. Would have to if there's a plan to go to council in the fall.
I agree that I would like to give Amy and the other board member an opportunity. So I don't know what's the best way forward.
Yeah, there is a path that we have to weave with email communication, but perhaps Karen and I and others can figure out how to manage that. And I suppose if anyone raises their hand and is really interested, we could go with that, but there's not really an opportunity for deliberation.
Right. And I'm not seeing the current members chomping at the bit to sign on.
Yeah, and I understand, and I read and reread the materials, and it didn't come across to me like it was a mandatory, no one leaves tonight until we have a RAB member kind of thing. So it's possible that a board could give it a pass, but I'll find out.
Struck me when I was reading it is it almost seems like it would be more effective to have a staff person who maybe was more familiar with the details, for example, of the local infrastructure and so forth, be able to, I mean, it almost seems like it's more of a committee of staff from the different groups would be more valuable than board members who are probably a little bit more remote or less informed about the details of some of the issues that may turn out to be the important ones there.
It's a fair point, and I imagine there will be staff involvement for just those reasons throughout the process. And it's a that is honestly in tension with boards and staff across the city. For some boards, the purview is quite clear, you know, what the roles and things are. But other boards are really interested in participating and are really pulling to be part of something like this. RAB has tended to be fairly straightforward over the years and has been less like that. So there may be other boards who it'll be a lively discussion to see who gets to participate because all of them might want to.
Well, Joe, could I suggest that perhaps because of the other agenda item you're going to bring up about the May meeting, our next
Yes.
May meeting, that if possible, if we could arrange just a few minutes, maybe at the start of that meeting, to deliberate on that and make some decisions, if that works with folks who will be focusing on that meeting for us. And if not, then we could work on something internal. I'm sorry, in the interim.
Yeah, that sounds good. And if my take is correct, that RAB may not have the most prevalent role of all the boards, it's also possible that we could get an extension on the deadline and somebody could join in progress. So I'll loop back internally and follow up with the board one way or another, but I like your suggestion and we'll do that if we can. I think there will be another board at the May meeting, but we'll talk about that in our upcoming agenda. All right, so moving on to the last item, and Chris, if you can pull the presentation up. The council meeting last Thursday included an update on our safe and managed public spaces program that utilities has a pretty significant role. And it's been an issue just of national scope and scale with more and more people, housing issues, untreated mental health or addiction issues, which can also be in the mix, and people just living outside and camping. And it's a real dilemma as a social issue, but a lot of cities like Boulder have an expansive set of services for people to plug into, and we also have some policy around our public spaces to make them safe and welcoming for all. And so occasionally like to brief the board on operational matters. This one is one of significant community interest, and I spend a fair amount of time on it and have been in the last several months, as others would know here. But so we sent a memo to the city council for the April meeting, and 4 of us directors who are involved in it, myself, the parks housing director, and the police chief, provided an update to the city council during a study session. And so we had a PowerPoint as well, and Chris has it up here. I won't go through all 27 slides that were in our presentation. I think I've picked out 3 or 4 to go through. But the evolution of the work prior to 2021, the city started, we had a camping ban, and I don't remember the exact timing, but also ended up with a propane ban. And so the city used to do this cleanup work with an outside vendor and an outside contractor, and each of the departments that had a stake in it would kind of coordinate with that vendor on their own. And there was not a lot of city coordination, and the issue just increased and grew and community concerns. In 2021, city council approved the budget for a pilot to establish an internal crew to do the work. That crew was set up to be in utilities, and I've learned over the time that I've been learning about this and tracking it, that municipalities that do this across the country, typically if they have an internal cleanup program, it's in Public Works, because we kind of have the operational mindset and ability to manage a program like that, and the people and equipment who do the work. And so we have a significant role in it. We work closely with the police officers each week. We have 9 positions and equipment, trucks and equipment allocated in utilities. In the 2023 budget, the 9 positions was essentially a doubling of what they had done in 2021. And part of that is paid out of the stormwater and flood utility, because the most attractive locations are the flood and drainage ways, and that's where a lot of the camping occurs. We can't have people living in our stormwater and that type of infrastructure in harm's way, or the materials that go with the camping, blocking intakes and conveyance work. So about half the program is paid for out of utilities funds, the other out of the city general funds. And so, Chris, if you'll go to the next slide, it's just from our presentation last Thursday. In about a year's span, we've had 783 cleanup activities. And there's some other metrics here. The tons of debris that we haul off in the utilities truck and bring to waste management, about 130 tons. And part of the program that we have established, as I mentioned, addiction is a big part of, it's not universal, but it's a big part of why people find themselves living like this. And there are permanent receptacles for safe disposal of the needles. And shortly after establishing our program, we developed a container, and as part of the weekly cleanup activities, we collect the needles, and there have been about 5,600 of them collected in a year's time that would otherwise be on the stream banks and paths and in the river. So it's really unfortunate in our society that this is a situation to be dealt with, but I think there's an important public safety component that our department, partnering with the police, provide and the cleanup work and keeping things clean. So if you go to the next one, had just gave an overview. I think the point of this one is that there's a whole process that goes with it, and I won't go through this in detail. If you want to go to the next one, Chris. We also have a prioritization formula that the crew and the lead of the 9 people that I mentioned, they size up community reports and their own observations and apply this prioritization formula to figure out where to go in the city to do the next week's cleanup work. So there's quite a bit to it. And if you'll go to the next one, I highlighted for council last week that we had seen the conditions in the field heading the wrong direction. Pretty successful with getting the people camping to voluntarily comply and move along from the time we started the program through 2022. But in 2023, we started to see that drop. And in recent weeks, there have been fires around Boulder High, and it's been in the paper. We did a big cleanup where the band shell had in the civic area had been kind of taken over in late January. Saw some activity on the Pearl Street Mall. As a result of all that, and with about 2 years of learning under our belt, we just recently updated our procedures and have been implementing them for several weeks now. And if you've been on the Creek Corridor in the downtown area recently, the conditions have been improved, and we'll see if we're able to sustain that. So that's next. I have another
That's a
one.
Jim.
Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to share with the board. Again, for a matters update, going into a little more detail than we usually do, but as I mentioned, it's a heightened community interest, and not a day goes by that my email inbox is not getting some attention from understandable community concerns.
Do you have 9 full-time people in the department working just on this one? You're asking for more.
Not right now.
Oh, I thought Joanna said something earlier about more positions.
Not for the encampment cleanup work, but for just general stormwater and flood maintenance. There are other positions.
Joe, I also seized upon that number of 9 staff. How's that affecting the department's ability to do its pre-homeless cleanup work? You know, all the maintenance that goes on.
That's a great question, and the whole program is brand new. And city council, I think, understood the need. So the staff and utilities are in addition to what we had before. We didn't redirect existing staff to go and do this work. City council saw it as a priority and they added positions and the funding for it to the budget.
Is there a safety issue for your own staff?
For sure, there's a safety element that goes with the work, and they use special equipment because of the needles, puncture-proof gloves and boots and things of that nature. Some of the days we do cleanup of abandoned trash and just do that on our own. In the days that we're interacting with people from our unhoused community, the police officers are present there. Again, you're sometimes dealing with addiction and mental health issues, so that presence is really important to keep our staff safe. And then unfortunately, some of the drugs that are now prevalent in our society in terms of inhaling or touching and contamination are something that we have to be aware of as well. Just last week, there was a pretty serious encounter with some new fentanyl type of drugs that had hit the street, and in 48 hours time there were 6 overdoses in the city of Boulder. And I think fortunately the police and the public safety people have Narcan and they're able to revive people in most cases, but it is a serious situation that our department is part of. And it's a fairly new thing. And having worked for Boulder I'm either in my 17th or 18th year, I've ridden to the office on my bike every day. And I remember that when tents started to be a thing, and it's just been escalating and increasing.
Do you know offhand what the budget is for this effort?
Think it's I'm speaking in round numbers. I knew that question was going to come up and I meant to get it. But I think the ongoing costs are about 300,000 per year for the first crew. And with the doubling of it, it's around 700, and then the initial cost for the equipment on top of that.
That's just for utilities or the overall?
Just for utilities. And I'm at least 40% sure that I'm going to need to follow up with you and correct those numbers.
If you wouldn't mind doing that, because I'm really curious as we talk about the CIP and the various enterprise funds, since that money is coming out all out of the stormwater and flood enterprise fund, what that translates into someone's utility rate increase?
Yeah, about half utilities fund, half.
Right, but the 700K is just utilities, right?
No, I think that's split. Okay, that's the total of the 2 crews.
But still, then of the half of that, of the 350K,
Yeah.
how does that translate into how much more, say, a residential ratepayer is paying?
Yeah, for sure. We'll note that. So unless there's more on that, that's what I have for matters, and I can switch to the upcoming agenda. And as promised, there's some complexity to May. Normally, we do a 3-month series on the CIP, and we were contemplating among ourselves whether we could possibly combine that into 2 anyway. And then I was reminded by Karen that there's a request for the boards, all the boards in the city, to attend some racial equity training, which they have scheduled for RAB in May, and that'll take up the entire agenda. So our plan would be to provide a written information item to you on the CIP and kind of get everyone grounded in where we left off last year and where things stand in advance of the June and July discussions. And then it would be a virtual only training on the racial equity. Karen and I will follow up later this week with more details on that. I think the board members have to sign up, if I'm not mistaken.
That's true.
And then, as mentioned previously, we have a public meeting that we need to have to be eligible. It's a requirement of some grant funding on the infrastructure bill grants. And so we were planning to have a separate meeting prior to RAB, which will also be virtual only, and the board members are invited to that on our phosphorus upgrades program. So in my tenure working with RAB as a director and previously as a manager, it might be the most convoluted monthly meeting that a board would have, but I think we can do it.
Same date as originally.
Yeah. I believe so, but need to confirm. And then in June, we would, as we do every year, try to clear our agenda of everything else and do a deep dive into our proposed 6-year capital improvement program for water, wastewater, and stormwater and flood. Get the board's feedback in June and then come back in July and ask for a recommendation from the board on the CIP. So that's what's coming up. And then it's been our practice goes beyond the 3 months that I usually do for the upcoming agenda, but generally we haven't been having an August meeting the last several years, and I think the efficiency plan might be on deck for September and some board review of that as well, but we'll update that as we get closer.
Just to clarify, the meeting on the schedule for May 15th would have this pre-meeting ahead of that, and then that would be the training session, and it would all be virtual.
Yep.
John, if I may, I think we confirm that the board's certainly welcome to join the phosphorus project funding public meeting, but there's no overarching expectation. You don't have a formal role.
There's no action the board has to take.
So, but share the word, spread the word and share the word, but it'll be just a public meeting to learn and discuss that project as appropriate.
So a lot to keep track of for May, and we'll help you do that.
Well, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board?
Just to double check that the meeting in June is later, right? It's the 4th.
That's correct. With the Juneteenth holiday, it's now be another month that the 3rd Monday won't work.
I believe it's the 26th.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, then with that, I'd like to move to our final agenda item, which is adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor of adjourning our meeting? We've unanimously agreed to adjourn.
Thank you.